All right, so in this lesson, please write down your math goal. We're going to compare multiplication and addition of fractions. So write down what you already know about multiplying fractions and what you already know about adding of fractions, and then come back to me. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. How do they compare? So 1/3 plus 2/3. How does that compare to multiplying 2/3 times 1/3? How are the problems the same? Will the answers be the same? Which one will have a greater number? So let's take a look at it. So in the 1/3 plus 2/3, right, we're adding 2/3 to 1/3, okay? In the multiplication, we're taking 2/3 of the 1/3. So, um, how are they the same? They use the same fractions. Will the answers be the same? No, the answers will not be the same. The addition will be greater because we're putting together two pieces to make a larger one, right? I'm taking a third and I'm adding 2/3. So I'm taking two different things and I'm combining them. When we add, we combine and we group together. So it's got to get bigger. In the multiplication, we're taking a part of something. So it's going to be smaller. So here, 2/3 of 1/3 means I'm taking 2/3 of the 1/3. I'm taking a part of a part. So my answer has to get smaller. So let's do the math to prove that that's so. So here I went ahead and I added 2/3 plus 1/3, and I got 3/3, which is the same thing as 1. So notice 1, the answer got bigger. It's bigger than a third, it's bigger than 2/3, right? Because we're combining them and we're making it bigger. But if we're multiplying 2/3 times 1/3, 2 times 1 is 2, 3 times 3 is 9. 2/9 is smaller than 2/3 and 1/3. And I can prove it here by writing 2/3, and I want to make the 2/3 equal to my nines, right? So it's got to be, I'm making an equivalent fraction. 3 times what is 9? 3 times 3. So I multiply that by 3, and that's going to give me 6/9. So my 2/3 is the same thing as 6/9. 6/9 is bigger than 2/9, right? And this, I can do the same thing for my 1/3. So I'm going to do my 1/3, and I'm going to do an equivalent fraction for 1/3. Okay, so 1/3 equivalent fraction. I know I want to make ninths. 3 times what is 9? 3. So if I multiply that by 3, you got to multiply that by 3. And that's going to give me 3/9. So 3/9 is bigger than 2/9. So I want you to notice that when you're multiplying fractions, that are less than 1, your answer gets smaller because you're taking a part of a part. It's not a whole thing. You're only taking a part of something. That's why your answer gets smaller. So that's today's math lesson, realizing that when you're multiplying two fractions that are less than 1, the answer has to get smaller because you're taking a part of a part. All right, so you try one. How do they compare? 1/6 plus 3/4. How does that compare to 3/4 times 1/6? So how are the problems the same? Will the answers be the same? Which one will have a greater number? Solve and prove it to me, and then come back to me. Okay, so in this case, I'm adding 1/6 to 3/4, right? So we're adding. So when you add, it's got to get bigger. So will the problems be the same? No. How are the problems the same? Well, we use the same fractions, right? We just have this in reverse order, but it's still the same fraction. 3/4 times 1/6, you're taking 3/4 of 1/6. So no, the answers will not be the same. The addition problem will be greater because we're combining two things to make it a larger thing, right? In the multiplication, we're taking a part of the 1/6, so it's going to be smaller. And let's see the math. And here's my proof. So if you added 1/6 plus 3/4, remember when we're adding, we need to find a common denominator. We talked about that in unit 1. So what are they? My lowest common factor for these is 12, right? So if you skip counted, you would have said they got 12 in common. So I did that and I got 9 12s. 1/6 is 2 12s, added it together, and I got 11 12s. All right. If you forgot how to add fractions, I suggest you go back to the videos from Unit 1 to review how to add fractions and finding a common denominator, okay? All right, to multiply, we've just been doing this right now. 3/4 times 1/6, I rewrote it, and I noticed that 3 went into 6. That was our common factor. So I divided by 3, and I got 1, and then I got 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 4 times 2 is 8, 1/8. Notice 1/8 is way smaller than 11 12ths. 11 12ths is really close to a whole, right? You're one away to make a whole. You need one more 12th to make a whole. So 11 12ths is bigger. Okay, write this down because we're going to be reviewing what happens when we add and subtract, what happens to our numbers. So tell whether the answer will be greater or less than the red number. So go ahead and write this down. So what happens when you add A plus B? Is the number going to get bigger? Is it going to be greater, or is it going to be less than the red number? What happens when you subtract A minus B? And these are just variables. It can be any number. You can substitute any number for these. So for example, I could say A is 3, B is 1, right? 3 plus 1 is 4, so it's going to get bigger, right? 3 minus 1 is 2. So think about it. Don't let that confuse you, okay? So pause the video and write these down, and then we'll come back and then we will check. Oh, I forgot to tell you, predict what you think is going to happen. Use your, you can substitute numbers. So write down if you think it's going to be greater or less than. I already told you, right? If you're adding two numbers together, it's going to be greater. If you're subtracting two whole numbers, it's going to be less than. So go ahead and write those down, and then B times A, greater or less, a fraction plus a fraction minus a fraction, or a fraction times a fraction. Are they going to be greater or less? Go ahead and write those down and predict if they're going to be greater or less. Okay, so when I'm combining two whole numbers together, the answer has to get bigger, right? Anytime I'm adding two whole numbers, it gets bigger. Anytime I subtract, it's got to be less, right? If I take one, if I have something and I take away something, of course it's got to be less, right? If I'm multiplying two whole numbers, it's gonna get bigger, right? Think of an example. Let's say this was 3 and A was 4. 3 times 4 is 12. It's always gonna get bigger unless you're multiplying by a 0, right? Or a 1. When you're adding two fractions together, it's gonna get greater, right? We already saw that. We did some examples. We added two fractions together and it got greater. What if we subtract two fractions? Well, yes, it's got to be less than what you started with, right? Whatever you have, you subtract something away from it, it's going to get less. When you multiply two fractions together, we already saw it's got to get less, right? Because you're taking a part of something. So your answer has to be less when you're multiplying just regular fractions that are less than 1. They have to get smaller because it's not even a whole. It's only a part of something, and then you're taking a part of it. So it's got to become less. All right, so how's multiplying fractions different from multiplying whole numbers? So write it down in your math notebook and then come back to me. How's multiplying fractions different from multiplying wholes? All right, so hopefully you got something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly in the same words, but hopefully you got something like this. When you're multiplying fractions, you are taking a part of a part or a part of a group, right? You're taking a part of something. When you're multiplying whole numbers, you're combining whole groups. It's just a faster way of adding. So you're combining. right? In essence, you're adding. So it's got to get bigger because you're basically adding, right? Because it's a faster way of doing addition. All right, so what did you learn today? Write down what you learned. Write down your proof of learning by solving a problem. In this case, you're going to have to do two problems, right? You're going to have to do an addition of fractions and a multiplication of fraction to show what you learned, and then write a reflection or a question if you have one.